The water boiling over on the stove draws my attention from the tablet. With a quiet swear, I flip it over and rush to the stove. When I started cooking several years ago, the stove was alien to me. I would have had better luck rebuilding my car's engine blindfolded than heating a can of SpaghettiOs without catching the house on fire. Now, my fingers move with well-practiced movements and turn down the heat, while my other hand reaches for the oven mitt without looking. Proper planning, elimination of clutter, and steady routines are the backbone of any happy home. It's one of the first tips from a parenting blog I've ever read, and it's steered me well so far. I cut the flames and pour the overflowing water into the strainer, almost entirely on reflex. The scalding water hisses as it hits cold metal, raising a cloud of steam that quickly obscures my glasses. A smile crosses my face as I hear the spaghetti flop into the bowl afterward without spilling a drop. While that cools, I lift the lid to my sauce. A smile crosses my lips as the Alfredo sauce rafts through the air. It's the first recipe I learned and quickly became one of Mikey's favorites. I feel the frown forming as I think about my son. Tending to the sauce doesn't distract me from the guilt and misgivings accompanying the involuntary gesture. Cooking is something I take pride in, a necessary skill that I had to pick up after Maria left. Reality shows have tempted a lot of people back into their kitchens. Everyone dreams of being the next winner of Master Chef or Hell's Kitchen these days. My motivations were never so grand. It's bad enough that my son doesn't have a mother anymore. I might as well treat him to whatever nice things our meager budget allows. And cooking is one of the cheapest ways to make that happen. It took years of trial and error, but now, after years of self-teaching through cooking blogs and videos on YouTube, my kid doesn't hound me to take him to McDonald's every day. Hell, my food is his favorite. He tells me so all the time. Or he used to. With a deep breath, I put a few finishing touches on the sauce, then take a large drink from the water bottle waiting on the counter. As I exhale, I remind myself of my mission statement, just like they said on Parenting Pros. I'm not doing this because Mikey's been withdrawn. It's not because he seemingly hit his moody teenage years a full year ahead of schedule. I miss the open communications we used to have, the frantic energy that used to propel Mikey throughout life. I'm not doing this because my son has become a mystery to me, practically a stranger living down the hall from my room. So why are we doing this, proud papas and mighty mamas? I'm doing it because he's my son, and I love him.
Mikey, dinner's ready.
There's no response, but I'm used to that now. When was the last time I heard his voice? A month? Longer? The strain of the bed springs sound throughout the thin walls. The floor shakes with Mikey's steps, more because of its age than his weight, I hope. But I can't stop staring at the family portraits that sway from their pegs with every step. I brace myself as the thunderous steps come around the corner before Mikey enters the kitchen. Watching your child grow is one of the subtlest pleasures anyone can ever experience. Nothing compares with the moment of their birth, of course. If love at first sight is real, then it happens at childbirth. That moment when your child comes into the world, kicking and screaming, is filled with instantaneous, overwhelming love. Watching them grow up always takes you back to that moment. It does so even now, even though he's changed so much since his first birthday. The light brown curls that always dotted his head are darker now, covered in sweat. Mikey's always been short for his age, barely 5 feet tall, which makes his sudden weight gain all the more alarming. He was 40 pounds overweight at his last checkup, and he's only gotten bigger since then. His stomach stretches past his shirt, lifting the fabric to reveal the faint purple tracks that will soon be stretch marks. The sweatpants that used to billow around him like a blanket now barely cling to his waist.
Hey, buddy, spaghetti Alfredo tonight, your favorite.
The changes in his body are nothing compared to his attitude. I remember the first time he tried this dish. His eyes lit up with pure joy as he slurped up the noodles. He cleaned his plate and eagerly asked for seconds. He doesn't ask anymore. I always make enough to use for lunch the next day. Now, with Mikey's new appetite, we're lucky if the food lasts an hour. A bestial grunt from the back of his throat is the closest he's coming to speaking to me in weeks. He sits at the table and waits for me to fill his plate with noodles and sauce. Part of this is my fault. The blogs all said so, and I can't help but agree. I've spoiled him since Maria left, too afraid I might lose him the same way I lost her. It's not too late to make up for that, though. But first, I need to act like nothing is amiss and not further feed his bad behavior. I know it's tough, but tough love is still love. The mantra from Parenting Pros plays through my mind as I plop spaghetti on Mikey's plate and then fill it with sauce. I turn away from him before I have to watch him eat. Shame wells up in me again, whether it's guilt from feeling this way about my son or disappointment that I've let him go this far without intervening. Not sure. The slurps and gargles behind me sound more at home at a pig trough than a dining room table. Mikey slams his plate on the table, rattling my cutlery atop the wooden surface. I ignore him and fill my plate before returning both pots to the stove. Only then do I turn around to face Mikey. His nostrils flare as he glares at me. His plate is spotless, a stark contrast to the rest of him. Alfredo sauce stains his mouth, dripping down his chin in a steady stream and staining his shirt. I inhale, savoring the aroma of my hard-cooked meal while channeling the instructions from the blog. Visualize success. Exhaling, I put my fork into the spaghetti, twirl, and then raise it to my mouth. I nearly bite down on my fork as Mikey slams his plate onto the table. His fork clinks onto the floor, but I ignore him, chew, and take a drink of water. Mikey brings the plate up again and slams it down, and this time, there's a loud clack of porcelain.
Michael Ian Gribble.
I use his full name and project confidence while also keeping my tone clear of any negative emotions. It's a harder act to balance than I thought, but I center myself with another breath before making eye contact with him.
That is not how we communicate in this house. We use our words.
There's a long pause. The only sound emanates deep within my son's body. I don't know if it's him or his stomach growling. The sound grows louder, but I don't yield in my resolve. I take another bite of spaghetti and then chase my seeming indifference with another drink of water. Mikey groans and lowers his eyes.
More.
It worked. I don't even try to suppress the smile spreading across my face. The blogs did encourage positive reinforcement after all. Granted, Mikey's request hadn't precisely been polite or eloquent, but it's the first time I've heard his voice in ages. It's different than I remember, raspy and harsh, like he hasn't spoken in years. Hormones.
No.
I shake my head.
Mikey, I'm glad you like my food, I really am. But we've got to do something about your weight. You've gained too much weight too fast and, well, it's not healthy, pal. So, starting today, we're going to make some changes, but we will do it together. We're going to watch what we eat and more.
His words grow louder with each second, so I raise my voice, trying to be heard over him. But the chant grows in frequency and volume no matter how loud I speak.
That's enough, Michael. Go to your room.
I've never shouted at my son like this before. I've never had to. He used to be such a sweet boy, curious and mischievous, but never deliberately cruel or disrespectful. My throat is raw from shouting, and my hands are itching and shaking with anger. But it seems to have done the trick. Mikey's stopped screaming and, instead, curls into himself, his body shaking. I take another deep breath when Mikey rears his head back and screams. The noise from his throat makes me take a step back. It's alien and ferocious, something straight from a horror movie. Mikey bolts up from the chair in a blur of motion that I wasn't expecting from his massive bulk. He wraps his hands around the table and flings it across the kitchen. The sound is explosive, mixing threateningly with his savage roars. My mind races for any advice from the parenting blogs when Mikey is in front of me, his eyes wide and filled with hate. His hands are a pair of vice grips that lock down over my wrists. I yelp as my bones groan and pop before Mikey lifts me into the air. The world spins around me before I crash into the sink. My head is pounding, and my vision is blurry as I pull myself up. The air is filled with the manic slurps and growls of a predator feasting. As I stand, my vision clears, revealing Mikey hunched over the floor. The spaghetti and sauce have spilled onto the floor, but he laps them up, his mouth gnashing with unsated gluttony. "Mikey!" My whisper of fear pulls his head up from the mess he's made. Something in his eyes softens, and for a second, I see my son again. He's only there momentarily before he bounds across the kitchen, through the hallway, and out the back door.
Mikey!
It takes a desperate moment for the shock to clear my system. I bolt after him, through the open door, and into our backyard. The memory of when we first looked at the backyard plays through my mind. We thought it would be a nice, secluded place for Mikey to play, the woods just beyond our border providing enough hikes and adventures to last all of Mikey's childhood. Now, in the dim moonlight, with no sign of my son, the woods look like they're taunting and mocking me as Mikey disappears into their shadows.
Mikey!
My son's name echoes around me throughout the woods, chanted by neighbors, police, and other volunteers. The first 24 hours are crucial when someone goes missing, especially a child. My neighbors seemed to understand, and I'm eternally grateful for the dozens of volunteers who showed up that first day. As the days have stretched on, though, I can't entirely hide my resentment. That burst of sympathy and action quickly dissipated by the second day. The ones that remain whisper loudly behind my back, all of them doing their best to keep their distance from me. Their insinuations have slowly been evolving into accusations ever since I called the police. I kept my voice calm with an even tone as I recalled the events that led up to Mikey's disappearance. As I did, I felt their eyes pull toward the kitchen. I knew what they were seeing: the shattered kitchen table, spilled food on the floor, and the circular bruises around my wrist, signs of a struggle. The detective put on a patient expression with a sympathetic smile that couldn't completely mask the suspicion in his eyes.
Tell me about Mikey's mother, Mr. Gribble.
I knew I was a suspect. While I'm no police officer, I am a stereotypical single parent. My time not spent reading parenting blogs is often spent devouring true crime documentaries and podcasts. From these hobbies, I know that few violent crimes are committed by strangers. The simplest solution is usually the correct one, and in terms of missing children, that usually means one of the parents. While I knew this, I also knew that cooperating was the quickest way to get them searching for Mikey. Despite the pain and embarrassment it brought up, I spared no detail about my and Maria's relationship. We were an instant connection, a whirlwind of emotions and sex that resulted in an unplanned pregnancy and an impromptu wedding. We were happy, unprepared, and in over our heads, of course, but happy, even more so when we brought Mikey home from the hospital. But things started to change around Mikey's second birthday. Maria grew distant and withdrawn. The conversations we used to have dried up in non-committed two-syllable words. She started gaining weight and gorging herself until one day when she was gone. The detective frowned after I told him this.
Gone? Without a trace. She left the car keys, purse, money, credit cards, clothes, and phone. 1 minute she was here, and then the next, like she never existed.
The suspicion in his eyes sharpened. I filed a missing persons report several years ago, and I knew he would be trudging over it with renewed interest. He would recognize the same changes in Maria's behavior mirrored in Mikey. Would he suspect that I was afraid of losing my son the same way that I lost my wife? Was that why I had confronted Mikey? What lengths would a desperate single parent go through to keep his son from leaving him?
Please,
I begged him, his suspicion crushing my resolve.
I'll do whatever you ask. Answer any questions, let you search anything. Tear my life apart and go through it with a microscope if you have to. But please, help me find my son.
I knew it wasn't enough to part the cloud of suspicion hanging around me, but my cooperation did lead them to focus on the woods. My story was strange, but it was the best lead they had to follow. And thankfully, they didn't exclude me from searching. I've been going through the woods every night, consisting of coffee and just a couple hours of nightmare-infused sleep every day. It's all that I can do to... The woods go out from under me as I accidentally place my foot off the trail. My balance tips to one side and sends me stumbling down the hill. The untamed land bashes against my skin as unseen rocks and sticks cut through my flesh. Finally, I skid to level ground, up to my knees in a puddle of something hot and sticky. Groaning, I reach for my flashlight, cutting through the darkness that engulfs me. The glass is cracked, adding broken lines of darkness against the comforting glow. As the beam touches my surroundings, my skin goes cold, and I hold my breath. I've fallen into a graveyard, but not one created by anything human. The blood is so thick that it has turned the ground into a red swamp, congealing around me. Skeletons float around me, bits of fur and rotting meat still clinging to some of them. They come in all shapes and sizes, minuscule bones of rats or squirrels, and larger ones that must be cats or dogs. Some are so large that they must have once been deer. I fight back the scream rising in my throat as the creature rounds up from the shadows. It must be a bear. It's too big to be anything else. It lumbers up from the base of a tree, tiny bones falling from its body as it steps toward me. Its breath is filled with the stench of decayed flesh, and as it steps closer, the moonlight catches its pale skin and the blood staining its flesh. It leans close to me, and I skid back as I feel its hot breath on me. I close my eyes tight, like a child with a nightmare, hoping it will just go away. "Daddy?" The familiar voice snaps my eyes open and into the beasts.
Oh my God, Mikey! What happened to you?
Somehow, I managed to get Mikey out of the woods.
Mikey!
I guess that's to be expected. The whole point of a search party is to make them loud and visible for the lost person. It's easy to avoid the lights cutting through the darkness and the chanting of my son's name. Was that how Mikey managed to stay hidden for so long? Did he not want to be found? I shudder as I think back to the bizarre death trap I had fallen into. Why would anyone choose that over being rescued? Something is wrong with my son. I don't know what, and I'm not ready for the questions the police will have. How can I be if I don't have answers either? Pushing those thoughts to the back of my mind, I focus on my son and lead Mikey back to our home and into the kitchen, where this nightmare began. He's bigger now. The clothes he wore a week ago are a few pieces of fabric, ripped and torn from his sudden expansion. He must weigh 400 pounds, but hasn't grown any taller, making him look like a boulder ball made of flesh and bone, mostly the former. He would look pitiful if not for the blood staining his mouth and hands. Mikey hasn't bathed since he's been gone, and his stench is staggering. And yet, somehow, there's a calm serenity about him that was absent during our argument. He lets me take him by his hand and to the shower. It takes some coaxing, but eventually, he manages to step into the steaming water. I hope that being back under a roof with soap and water will remind Mikey of his humanity. I leave a towel for him, but there aren't any clothes big enough to fit him, not even my own. We settle for wrapping a silken sheet around him. With the dirt, stench, and blood gone, he almost looks like an innocent child again. His footsteps are staggering when I lead him to the bed, where he instantly collapses onto the mattress, the springs loudly straining against his weight. As I turn on his nightlight, I realize I'm in shock. My stomach flips as I think of what Mikey has done. Yes, people do strange and horrible things to survive the elements, but Mikey was so close to home. He didn't need to hunt and eat raw flesh to stay alive. And where did a 12-year-old boy develop such skills? He might be the first person rescued heavier than when he went missing. How am I going to explain any of this to the police? The police, I sigh as I sink into my recliner and fish the detective's business card from my wallet. I'm in no hurry to answer any of his questions, but I know I can't put this off.
Mr. Gribble?
The repeated words finally make sense. It still takes a long moment to lift myself from the shroud of sleep and exhaustion. Slowly, the jagged shapes come into focus. The detective stands before my chair, but he's not alone. A uniformed police officer and a couple of paramedics stand beside him. Their presence in my house throws me off guard, and I stare at them in open confusion.
You called and said your son came home?
He reminds me, his tone gentle but prodding.
He's been missing for a week. We need to make sure he's not suffering from exposure.
And to make sure there are no signs of abuse. This will at least clear my name of that wrongdoing. I hadn't realized how exhausted I was when I sat down. A glance at my phone reveals that it's only been half an hour since I called. I nod and lead the group down the hall to Mikey's room.
Just be gentle with him,
I caution as I turn the doorknob.
He's been through.
The reek barrels through the door as I push it open. The police officers bend over and gag while the paramedic hurriedly reaches for a mask. There's a writhing mass on the bed that I can barely make out through the nightlight's meager glow, so I flip on the light switch. Mikey's gone. In his place is a stinking mass of dirty snow on the bed. I rush toward it, adrenaline allowing me to shove past the hands that grip me by the shoulder. Screaming, I run at the thing and claw at it. Strands come away in rivulets in my hand. Silk, just like the sheet that I had draped over Mikey's body. He has to be somewhere inside. I yank away swaths of the dirty fabric, ignoring the smell threatening to suffocate me. Finally, I make a hole, shove my hands through, and feel Mikey's hair beneath my hands. The cops yank at me, trying to pull me back.
No, let me go. I need to.
Agony rips through my hands, silencing my protest as an involuntary scream rips through my throat. My resistance yields to the pain, but with a jerk from the officers, I fall off the bed, tumbling into their arms. Raising my hands, I look at the stumps spewing hot blood where my fingers used to be. The paramedics surround me, and something stings my arm. As the sedative fades my vision and dulls the pain, I stare at the cocoon on the bed. The silk is already regrowing, filling the makeshift hole I dug, dampening the sound of gnashing teeth against bone. The inspiration for this story comes from SCP-200 in the SCP Foundation archives. If you enjoyed this story, there are plenty more like it on my other podcast, The SCP Experience. I publish regular episodes, so be sure to follow to get notified when new episodes are released on the SCP Experience. The following is a description of SCP-200. SCP-200 is contained within a chrysalis measuring 172.4 centimeters in length from stem to tip, attached to a standard queen-size bed frame and mattress. The chrysalis is a mottled brown in color, and analysis shows it to consist of several layers of silk woven in such a way as to be coarse to the touch. SCP-200 itself was last seen as a 12-year-old Caucasian male, measuring 152 centimeters in height and weighing 168.73 kilograms. Researchers have been unable to explain how the child produced the silk to construct its encasement. Ultrasound tests have been unable to detect any solids within the chrysalis. However, fluid samples extracted from within reveal human DNA matching that of the child in question. SCP-200 lies dormant a majority of the time, although it may be observed twitching occasionally, particularly if it is startled by sudden contact or a loud noise. However, in its current state, it poses no threat. Thanks for listening. If you enjoy these stories, be sure to subscribe to the podcast and check out some more of my episodes here.